The thief's last stand. The morning sun cast long shadows through the brass gears and steam pipes of Havenport, the greatest floating city in the seven skies. Nora Blackwood pressed her back against the cold metal wall of an alley, listening to the heavy footsteps of bounty hunters echoing off the walkways above. Her leather coat was torn, her dark hair matted with grease and desperation. 3 days ago, she had commanded the fastest airship in the fleet. Now she had nothing but the lockpicks in her boots and the bitter taste of betrayal on her tongue. Victor Ravencrest had played his hand perfectly. Her own first mate, her trusted friend, had sold her crew's location to the Sky Marshals in exchange for amnesty and gold. When the attack came at dawn, Nora barely escaped with her life while her ship, the Wind Dancer, burned and fell toward the earth miles below. 12 good people died because she had trusted the wrong man. The footsteps faded, and Nora crept toward the merchant docks. Her stomach cramped with hunger, and her coin purse held nothing but lint. The irony wasn't lost on her. Nora Blackwood, who had stolen from floating palaces and merchant princes, reduced to picking pockets for bread money. But survival meant swallowing pride, and she needed passage off this floating rock before the hunters found her trail. The storm chaser sat moored at the end of Pier 7, a sleek vessel with midnight blue sails and brass fittings that gleamed despite the morning mist. Nora had watched the crew for 2 days, memorizing their patterns. The captain was a tall man with storm-gray eyes and sun-weathered hands who treated his crew with respect rather than fear. Unusual for a sky captain, but it would make her job easier if they weren't expecting treachery from within. She waited until the afternoon watch change, then slipped aboard through the cargo hold. The ship's belly was filled with sealed crates, marked for the outer territories valuable enough to suggest the captain could afford to lose some goods without noticing. Nora selected a crate she could hide behind and settled in for the long haul to whatever destination would take her far from haven. Port. The gentle rocking motion of the moored ship and her exhaustion from 3 days of running began to take their toll. Despite her best efforts to stay alert, Nora's eyes grew heavy. She had just begun to doze when a shadow fell across her hiding spot. Most stowaways wait until we're airborne before taking a nap, a deep voice said with what sounded like amusement rather than anger. Shows commitment to the craft. Nora's hand went to the knife at her belt as she looked up into those storm-gray eyes she'd observed from a distance. Captain Darius Kane stood with his arms crossed, but his posture was relaxed rather than threatening. Up close, she could see the laugh lines around his eyes and a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. "I suppose you'll be turning me over to the Port Authority," Nora said, not bothering to stand. There was nowhere to run, and she was tired of running anyway. "That depends," Darius replied, crouching down so they were at eye level. "Are you running from something you did, or something that was done to you?" The question caught her off guard. Most captains would have already called for the guards. "Does it matter?" "It does to me." His gray eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "Nora Blackwood, isn't it? I heard about what happened to the Wind Dancer. Victor Ravencrest's been bragging about his clever trap all over the port bars." Nora's chest tightened. Her ship's destruction was already tavern gossip. "Then you know I'm worth a considerable bounty." "I also know Ravencrest is a snake who'd sell his own mother for scrap metal." Darius stood and extended his hand to her. "I'm not in the business of collecting blood money, Miss Blackwood, but I am short a navigator, and word is you know these skies better than anyone." She stared at his outstretched hand, afraid to hope. "What's the catch?" "No catch. Honest work for honest pay, and passage to wherever you want to go." His smile was warm and genuine. "Though I should warn you, we're heading into dangerous waters. The Shattered Isles aren't exactly a pleasure cruise." Nora took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. His grip was strong and calloused from years of rope work, and she felt the first spark of something she'd thought died with her ship. Not just gratitude, but possibility. "When do we sail, Captain Kane?" Winds of trust, Storm Chaser lifted off. From Haven Port, just as the evening bells chimed across the floating city. Nora stood at the bow, watching the lights shrink below them as Darius guided his ship into the cloud lanes that would carry them toward the Shattered Isles. The wind whipped through her hair, and for the first time in days, she could breathe freely. "Miss Blackwood," Finn O'Malley called from the rigging above. The first mate was a wiry man with red hair and quick hands who'd welcomed her aboard without question. "Captain wants to see you in his cabin for the route planning." Nora made her way aft, passing crew members who nodded respectfully rather than eyeing her with suspicion. Darius had introduced her simply as their new navigator, making no mention of her notorious reputation. When she knocked on his cabin door, his voice called for her to enter. The cabin was sparkingly furnished, but comfortable, with charts covering every surface and a small collection of books secured behind glass. Darius stood hunched over his navigation table, plotting their course with careful precision. "The outer markers show storm fronts building along the traditional routes," he said without looking up. "I'm hoping your knowledge of the back channels might help us avoid the worst of it." Nora moved to stand beside him, studying the charts. His shoulder brushed against hers as he pointed to various landmarks, and she caught the scent of leather and sea salt that clung to his clothes. "There's a passage through the Singing Peaks that most captains avoid," she said, tracing a route with her finger. "The wind currents are tricky, but if you can handle her in tight spaces, it'll cut 2 days off our journey." "Singing Peaks," Darius mused. "I've heard the sound drives crews mad. Only if you listen too long. The trick is to stuff wax in your ears and trust your instruments." She glanced at him sideways. "Though I suppose that requires trusting your navigator." Their eyes met, and Nora felt that spark again, stronger this time. Darius was studying, her face as if trying to solve a puzzle, and she had the unsettling feeling he might actually succeed. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. "You could have any navigator in the seven skies. Why take on someone with a price on her head?" Darius straightened, his expression growing serious. 5 years ago, I trusted the wrong person. Lost. My ship, my crew, everything I'd worked for. Spent 2 years in a debtor's prison, while the man who betrayed me bought himself a lordship with my cargo. Nora's breath caught. "What happened?" "Eventually got out, started over with this ship, and a crew willing to take a chance on a disgraced captain." He rolled up the charts with practiced efficiency. "I know what betrayal tastes like, Miss Blackwood, and I know what it's like to have nothing left to bargain with." Before Nora could respond, a knock interrupted them. "Captain," Finn's voice called urgently. "We've got a passenger who says she needs to speak with you. Claims it's about our destination." Darius frowned. "Bring her in." The woman who entered was striking in an otherworldly way, with silver-white hair and violet eyes that seemed to hold secrets. She wore traveling clothes that had seen hard use, and there was something about her bearing that suggested nobility. "Fallen on difficult times." "Captain Kane," she said with a slight accent Nora couldn't place. "I am Zara Nightwind. I booked passage to the outer territories, but I've just learned you're bound for the Shattered Isles. I must speak with you about what you'll find there." "The cargo manifest is private, Miss Nightwind," Darius replied carefully. Zara, single quotes S. Violet gaze shifted to Nora. "But Miss Blackwood's involvement changes things considerably. Tell me, Nora, are you still searching for the Starfall compass?" Nora's blood turned to ice. The Starfall compass was her family's greatest treasure, stolen along with everything else when Victor betrayed her. Only a handful of people knew of its existence, and fewer still understood its true purpose. "How do you know about that?" Nora demanded. Zara smiled mysteriously. Because where we're going, you'll need it to find what you've truly lost. The compass isn't just a navigation tool. It's the key to the floating gardens, where the ancients hid their greatest treasures. And if Victor Ravencrest took it from you, I suspect he's already on his way there. Darius looked between the two women, his jaw tightening. What aren't you telling me? Nora's hands clenched into fists. The Starfall compass had been in her family for generations, passed down through a line of sky captains and explorers. It was more than just treasure. It was her birthright, her connection to a legacy that Victor had stolen along with everything else. It's complicated, she said finally. Then uncomplicated, Darius replied firmly. If we're sailing into danger, I need to know what we're facing. As the storm chaser flew deeper into the night, Nora began to tell him about the compass, about her family's history, and about the sister she'd lost track of years ago. With each word, she felt the walls she'd built around her heart beginning to crack. And when Darius reached out to touch her hand in comfort, she didn't pull away. Secrets in the mist floating gardens appeared at dawn, like something from a fever dream. Vast stone platforms suspended in the clouds and overgrown with vegetation that glowed with its own inner light. Ancient spires twisted toward the sky, their surfaces covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. The storm chaser drifted through the outer mists, while their crew stood in awed silence at the rails. Never seen anything like it, Finn whispered, his usual jovial manner subdued by the otherworldly beauty before them. Nora stood beside Darius at the helm, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. According to Zara's maps, this was where the Starfall compass would lead them to the greatest treasure vault of the ancient Sky Lords. But it was also where Victor Ravencrest would be waiting if he deciphered the compass's secrets. There, Zara pointed to a landing platform carved with intricate geometric patterns. Elder Corvin maintains the gardens. If anyone knows about recent visitors, it would be him. They moored the storm chaser to weathered stone pillars that had stood for centuries, and Nora felt a strange tingling in the air as she stepped onto the platform. The very ground seemed alive with energy, and the plants around them pulsed with bioluminescent rhythms that matched her heartbeat. Elder Corvin emerged from the gardens, like a figure from legend, tall and ethereal, with skin that seemed to shimmer, and eyes the color of deep water. His ageless face regarded them with curiosity rather than hostility as he approached. "Travelers seeking the old paths," he said in a voice like wind through leaves. "It has been some time since any have found their way here, though I sense you carry shadows with you, child of the storms." His gaze settled on Nora with uncomfortable intensity. "We're looking for something that was stolen from me," Nora said, fighting the urge to step closer to Darius for comfort. "Ah, compass that belonged to my family." Corvin nodded slowly. "The Starfall compass. Yes, it passed through here 3 days ago, carried by a man with darkness in his heart. He sought the Vault of Echoes, where your people once stored their greatest treasures." The elder's expression grew grave, but he was not alone. He brought prisoners with him. Nora's knees nearly buckled. "Prisoners?" "A young woman who shared your eyes and your stubborn spirit." She called out a name as they took her deeper into the gardens. "Your name, I believe." "Elena?" Nora breathed. Her sister, who she'd thought was safe in the eastern colonies, was here. Victor hadn't just stolen her compass. He'd taken her family. Darius's hand found her shoulder, steadying her. "Where is this vault?" Corvin gestured toward the heart of the gardens, where the largest spire twisted into the clouds, at the center of the great maze. But beware, the ancients protected their treasures with more than locks and keys. The maze responds to the heart's true desires, and many who enter never find their way out. As night fell over the floating gardens, Nora sat alone on a terrace overlooking the maze, her mind racing with plans and fears. The ancient stones beneath her feet or warm to the touch, heated by some internal energy source that defied explanation. "You're planning to go in alone," Darius said, emerging from the shadows. He'd changed from his captain's coat into darker clothing suitable for stealth work. "It's my responsibility," Nora replied without turning around. "Victor took everything from me because of what I am, what my family represents. I won't let you risk your crew from my mistakes." Darius sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "And what if I told you that I'm not doing this for your family legacy or your treasure? What if I'm doing it because somewhere along the way I've come to care about what happens to you?" Nora turned to look at him, her heart skipping at the intensity in his gray eyes. Darius ... "I know we haven't known each other long," he continued, reaching up to brush a strand of hair from her face. "But when you're running for your life and someone catches you, you learn pretty quickly what kind of person they are. You're brave, Nora, and kind, and you've been hurt enough." The tenderness in his voice broke something open inside her chest. Without thinking, she leaned into his touch, letting herself feel safe for the first time in weeks. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "Not of Victor or the maze, or even dying. I'm scared of hoping for something and losing it again." "Then don't hope alone," Darius murmured, and when he kissed her, gentle and sure under the strange aurora that danced across the garden skies, Nora felt like she was finally coming home. They made love that night on the terrace, surrounded by flowers that glowed like stars and the whispered songs of ancient winds. Nora had known passion before, but never this sense of completion, of finding the missing piece of herself in another person's arms. When Darius held her afterward, tracing patterns on her bare skin, while the gardens hummed their eternal lullabies around them, she finally understood what she'd been running toward all along. Tomorrow, they would face the maze and whatever horrors Victor had prepared for them. But tonight, wrapped in Darius's warmth and the magic of the floating gardens, Nora allowed herself to believe that some things lost could indeed be found again. The price of everything the morning brought with it the sound of airship engines cutting through the garden mists. Nora jolted awake in Darius's arms as the unmistakable roar of war vessels filled the air above them. Through the terrace archway, she could see the dark silhouettes of Victor's fleet descending like mechanical vultures toward the floating gardens. "Damn," Darius cursed, already pulling on his clothes. "He's brought half the mercenary air force with him." Nora's hands shook as she fastened her leather coat. Somewhere in the maze below, Elena was trapped with a madman who'd already proven he'd kill anyone to get what he wanted. "He knows we're here. This is a trap." "Then we spring it on our terms," Darius replied grimly. He activated a small communication crystal that would reach Finn aboard the storm chaser. "Get her ready to fly at a moment's notice, and keep the engines warm. We may need to leave in a hurry." Victor's flagship, the Iron Serpent, settled onto the main platform with the grace of a predator. Nora watched from concealment as her former first mate emerged, flanked by armed mercenaries and a giant of a man she recognized as Marcus Steele, Victor's new lieutenant. Even from a distance, she could see Victor's triumphant smile as he surveyed the ancient gardens. "Nora Blackwood," Victor's voice boomed across the platforms, amplified by speaking horns. "I know you're here. Come out, and perhaps we can discuss terms for your sister's continued good health." Beside her, Darius tensed. "Wait," he murmured as Nora started to rise. "Let's see what he's really after." Victor gestured, and two of his men dragged a struggling figure from the ship's hold. Even at this distance, Nora could see Elena's dark hair and defiant posture. Her sister looked thin and frightened, but unbroken, which filled Nora with both relief and rage. "You have something that belongs to me," Victor continued, "the knowledge to navigate the maze. In exchange, I'll give you something that belongs to you." "Seems fair," doesn't it? He's going to kill her either way, Nora whispered, her hand moving to her knife. And us too, once he gets what he wants. Darius caught her wrist gently, but firmly. Then we don't give him what he wants. We take it. What followed was the most desperate and exhilarating hour of Nora's life. While Darius created a distraction by leading Victor's forces on a chase through the upper terraces, she slipped into the maze with Zara and 2 of the storm chasers' crew. The ancient pathways shifted and changed around them like a living thing, responding to their intentions and fears. The maze knows why we're here, Zara explained, as they navigated passages that seemed to rearrange themselves behind them. It will test whether our motives are pure. Nora almost laughed at that. Her motives were anything but pure, she wanted. Her sister back, her property returned, and Victor Ravencrest dead or ruined. But apparently, the maze found her honesty acceptable. Because the paths continued to open before them, they found Elena in a crystalline chamber at the maze's heart, guarded by only 2 men who fell quickly to Nora's knives and her companions. Pistols. The reunion was brief, but fierce Elena throwing herself into Nora's arms, while tears of relief streamed down both their faces. "I knew you'd come," Elena gasped. "I told Victor you'd never abandon family, no matter what it cost you." "Never again," Nora promised, holding her sister tight. "We're getting out of here." But Victor had anticipated her rescue attempt. When they emerged from the maze, they found him waiting with a dozen armed men and the Starfall compass gleaming in his hands. Worse, Marcus Steele held Darius at gunpoint, while blood ran from a cut on the captain's forehead. "Touching," Victor sneered. The infamous Nora Blackwood, reduced to sentiment. "You always were too soft for this business." "Let him go," Nora said, her voice deadly calm. "Your quarrel is with me." "My quarrel is with your entire damned family," Victor snarled, his composure finally cracking. "Did you think I didn't know? The Blackwoods have been hoarding the location of the Sky Lord's greatest treasure vault for generations, keeping it from those who could actually use it. Well, no more." He held up the compass, its crystalline surface catching the strange light. "Of the gardens. This little trinket is the key to enough wealth to buy kingdoms. And you're going to help me claim it, or watch everyone you care about die." Nora looked at Darius, bull. What the heart finds 3 months later, Nora stood on the deck of the Storm Chaser as she flew through clear skies toward Newport, the largest trading hub in the 7 skies. The wind in her hair felt like freedom, and the weight of the starfall. Compass in her pocket felt like justice finally served. Victor Ravencrest was imprisoned in the floating dungeons of Haven Port, his mercenary fleet scattered, and his reputation in ruins. Elena emerged from the passenger cabin, looking healthier and happier than she had since their reunion. "Still can't believe you convinced Captain Torres to let you keep the treasure," she said, joining Nora at the rail. Nora smiled, remembering the tense negotiations with Newport's authorities. The Sky Lord's vault had indeed contained riches. Beyond imagination, ancient artifacts, rare metals, and knowledge that would reshape understanding of the floating worlds. But she'd argued successfully that as the last heir to the Blackwood navigation legacy, the treasure was rightfully hers by ancient law. "Torres is a practical man," Nora replied. "He'd rather have me as an ally than an enemy, especially with the Eastern Sky pirates getting bolder." "And what about Darius?" Elena asked with a knowing smile. "Still planning to go your separate ways once we reach port?" Nora's heart gave its familiar flutter at the mention of his name. Over the past months, as they'd salvaged what they could from the vault and evaded the last of Victor's allies, she and Darius had grown closer than she'd ever thought possible. He'd proven himself not just as a lover, but as a true partner, someone who trusted her judgment, supported her decisions, and somehow managed to make her laugh even in the darkest moments. "It's complicated," Nora said, the same words she'd used. to describe the compass months ago. Only if you make it complicated, Elena replied. You love him. He loves you. You're both free agents with your own ship and enough treasure to go anywhere you want. Seems simple to me. Before Nora could respond, Darius appeared on deck, looking every inch the confident sky captain in his long coat and weather-beaten hat. But his eyes were soft when they found hers, and the smile he gave her was warm enough to melt ice. Ladies, he said with a courtly bow that made Elena giggle, we'll be making port within the hour. I trust you're both ready for solid ground. Under your feet? Ready as anyone can be, Nora replied, though the truth was more complex. Newport meant decisions about Elena's future, about her own plans, about whether the life she'd built aboard the storm chaser was temporary or permanent. As if reading her thoughts, Darius moved to stand beside her while Elena tactfully retreated, to check on their cargo. Having second thoughts about the merchant business? He asked quietly. Nora had used part of her restored fortune to buy a partnership in Darius's trading company, transforming the storm chaser from a simple cargo hauler into one of the most well-equipped exploration vessels in the seven skies. They'd already received offers for expeditions to uncharted territories, treasure-hunting contracts, and even a few requests for passenger service to remote destinations. No second thoughts about the business, she said carefully. But I keep wondering if you're having second thoughts about the partnership. Darius was quiet for a long moment, watching the sprawling platforms of Newport grow larger ahead of them. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of complete honesty. When I first offered you passage off Haven Port, I thought I was helping someone down on their luck, he said. I had no idea I was rescuing the woman I'd spend the rest of my life loving. Nora's breath caught. Darius ... I know it's fast, he continued, turning to face her fully. And I know you've got good reasons to be careful about trusting anyone. But I also know that some opportunities only come once, and a smart captain doesn't let them sail away. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small box made of the same crystalline material as the starfall compass. Inside, nestled in midnight, blue velvet, was a ring forged from sky metal and set with a stone that seemed to hold captured starlight. Nora Blackwood, he said, dropping to one knee right there on the deck as the crew pretended not to watch from the rigging. Will you marry me? Will you be my partner in all things, for as long as the winds carry us? Nora looked down at him, this man who'd caught her when she was falling, who'd trusted her when she had nothing to offer, who'd fought beside her and held her, and somehow convinced her that home wasn't a place but a person. She thought about all the things she'd lost and all the things she'd found, and realized that the greatest treasure had never been gold or artifacts or even family legacy. It had been learning that love was something that multiplied when shared, rather than something that diminished when given away. Yes, she said, her voice strong and sure as she pulled him to his feet. Yes to all of it. When he kissed her, the crew cheered from the rigging, and Elena burst into delighted applause from the cabin doorway. Newport spread before them like a promise of new adventures, and the storm chaser carried them toward a future neither had dared to dream of when they first met in that cargo hold. Some treasures, Nora reflected as Darius slipped the ring onto her finger, were worth more than all the gold in the seven skies. And some bargains were made not with coins or goods, but with hearts freely given and gratefully received. The wind sang through the sails, carrying them toward whatever adventures awaited, and Nora Blackwood had never felt richer in her life.